I'm Robert Atkinson of Riverside Management Group, the moderator. We are very pleased to welcome two New York area freshman congressional representatives. We have with us Richie Torres, a Democrat from New York, and Andrew Garbarino, a Republican from New York. A little background on both. Congressman Garbarino is a congressional representative for New York's 2nd District and is a member of the House Committee on Homeland Security and the House Committee on Small Business. Prior to winning his seat in Congress, he served 4 terms as a member of the New York Assembly, where he represented the 7th District. During his tenure in the Assembly, he fought to increase state funding for the Long Island school districts, to protect the environment, including the Great South Bay, to oppose tax hikes, and to support law enforcement. Before joining the New York Assembly, he worked as an attorney in private practice. Congressman Garbarino holds a bachelor's degree and a JD degree from Hofstra University. Moving on to Congressman Torres. He is a congressional representative for New York's 15th District and is the vice chair of the House Committee on Homeland Security and a member of the House Committee on Financial Services. He is also a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, is chair of the Task Force on Economic Recovery for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, is a member of the LGBTQ plus Equality Caucus, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the Future Forum Caucus, and the Labor Caucus. Prior to being elected to Congress, Congressman Torres spent 7 years as the New York City Council member for the 15th District, where he served as the chair of the Committee on Public Housing and was a deputy majority leader. In 2013, at the age of 25, Congressman Torres became New York City's youngest elected official and the first openly LGBTQ person elected to office in the Bronx. As chair of the Oversight and Investigations Committee, he focused on taxi medallion predatory loans and New York City's third-party transfer program. So the roundtable is very pleased to have 2 emerging local and actually national leaders join us. The title of their discussion today will be The Freshman Congressional Perspective. Now, before we dive into this interesting and relevant topic, I want to thank our sponsors for their ongoing support of the roundtable and this call. They include, of course, and you can see up on the screen, Alston & Bird, Baker Tilly, Bloomberg, Deloitte, Grant Thornton, New Mountain Capital, Miri Asset Securities Prime Brokerage, and our nonprofit sponsors, Kaya, the United Kingdom Department of Trade, and the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg Trade and Investment Office. A few other programming notes before we begin. First, I want to remind everyone or point out that on April 22nd, macro and cryptocurrency pioneer Michael Novogratz will be joining us for a virtual fireside chat between noon and 1 p.m. to discuss everything from cryptocurrency to the greater blockchain universe and every macro theme in between. So definitely join us for that. Also on April 27th, between noon and 1 p.m., we will be hosting Perrin Quarshie and Scott Brooks of RealBlocks. And now RealBlocks is a very interesting company that is at the forefront of expanding the frontier of the alternative investment world to include retail investors. So I think anyone who is either running a fund or raising capital for one may want to listen in on this. So please join us for these events and check our websites out for more information. And finally, so we don't want anyone to think that we're all work and no play, please join us for our Spring Cocktail Networking event on April 29th at 5:30, and that runs from 5:30 through 7. And just a reminder about today's program to everyone, and that is that the congressman will be answering my questions for approximately 45 to 50 minutes, and then we'll open up the floor to the audience. However, at any time during the call, you are able to send questions to me for them by using the tools at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. So please feel free to do so. So let's get to it, gentlemen. Why don't we begin by asking you to tell us a little bit about your backgrounds, your values, and why it was that you chose to run for public office. So Congressman Torres, why don't we begin with you? Love to hear your views on this.
The starting point for me was my own lived experience in the Bronx. I spent almost all my life in poverty. I was raised by a single mother who had to raise 3 children on minimum wage, which in the 1990s was $4.25. And I grew up in public housing in conditions of mold and mildew, leaks and lead, without reliable heat and hot water. And one day, after years of interning for a local city council member, I said, why not take the leap of faith and attempt to be a public servant? And so I ran at the age of 24. I had no ties to the political establishment, no ties to the dynasties of Bronx politics. I was simply a young housing organizer. But I came to realize a council district only has about 160,000 people, and maybe 60,000 are registered Dems, but only 6,000 vote. And I said to myself, I can knock on 6,000 doors. And so I spent a year knocking on doors. I went into people's homes. I heard their stories. I would have voters tell me in the 40 years I've been living in the South Bronx, I've never had a candidate for public office or a public official knock on my door. And I won my first city council race on the strength of door-to-door campaigning. And so I was in the city council for about 7 years. And then eventually I ran for Congress. And for me, it's a natural progression because as a former local legislator, I have an on-the-ground knowledge of how federal policies operate at the local level. So I feel like I'm benefiting enormously from my experience as a local legislator. There's a sense in which I remain a city council member at heart.
Yes, thank you. Congressman Garbarino.
Oh, yeah, and Reggie, I agree with you about being the legislator. I'm having a little fear missing out there. My former colleagues are up in Albany debating the budget right now, so I miss it. But similar to Rich, I grew up on Long Island, and Suffolk County in Sayville. My grandfather, I'm third generation. My grandfather had a grocery store back here in the 40s and 50s, and he worked very hard, which allowed my father to go to law school, and then he started a local law practice. That was always the plan. I was always going to go to law school and work with him, and I went to George Washington for undergrad down in D.C. Fell in love with Washington, but then the idea was to come home and work at the law firm, and then I was never supposed to run for elected office. That was never the plan. And I feel like that's, when you run for elected office, the people who plan it out don't do as well as the ones that, grab the opportunity when it comes. And I remember the state senator at the last second decided to retire in 2012, and they had to pick somebody to replace him within 3 days. So they chose the local assemblyman, and then they had to pick someone to replace him within 3 days. So I was chosen. The local Republican leader came and said, "We want you to run for state assembly." I said, "What's the state assembly?" And I ran. I won. I wasn't supposed to win. I was running against a former town councilman, very popular. He was a Republican and switched to Democrats. But like Richie said, I knocked on a lot of doors, and a lot of people, voted for me because they had met me. And then there was that door-to-door campaigning, which really means a lot to people. They get to meet the person they're going to vote for. And then that started, and 8 years in the assembly in New York State, and then Pete King, out of nowhere, decides to retire. And again, there were people who should have had it. There was a state senator who could have run and taken it. There was the local legislator could have done, and they all opted out. And I said, I'm gonna go for it, and it worked. It worked out. I didn't realize how bad I was until I saw some of the commercials they ran against me. But we were successful, and I'm just happy to be in Congress and happy, looking forward to getting some things done.
Terrific. And I think both of you have sort of described your districts to one extent or another, but just curious, how has COVID impacted your respective districts? And so, Congressman Garbarino, why don't we begin with you on this?
Well, it's completely, ravaged my district. I know it's ravaged the entire state of New York. And Rich, you can, speak about the city. But we were the epicenter. It hit us hard. It hit us first. The governor shut down the entire state almost, which crushed my small businesses. It crushed, all business. Not to mention, and now we have some of my schools are still not reopened fully. So, it's affecting my students. I mean, just between the deaths and people getting sick, what it did to businesses, what it's done to the education system, the economy, it has completely ravaged every part of my district. And now we're trying to rebuild. We're trying to get vaccines out. We're trying to make sure that people can reopen. They can reopen safely. Kids can get back to school safely. It's because we're still not reopened. There's other states that are fully reopened. We're trying in New York. I know the state's trying to do things smart. Whether or not I agree with all that, I'll save for another discussion. But it just, for my district, it hit every aspect of life.
Thank you. Congressman Torres.
COVID-19 has been a catastrophe for the South Bronx. It led to, even before COVID-19, the South Bronx was said to be the poorest congressional district in America. During COVID, we saw a catastrophic loss of income. The unemployment rate in a neighborhood like West Farms could be as high as 25%, which is comparable to the joblessness of the Great Depression. COVID-19 has revealed the deepest inequalities in American society, and one of them is the digital divide. We saw during COVID-19, the digital divide deprive our students of their fundamental right to an education. When we made the transition from in-person instruction to remote learning, not every student had an electronic device at home. Not every student had access to the internet. And even if you did, remote learning is no substitute for in-person instruction. So there's been a real loss of learning during COVID-19, and that's going to have profound consequences, especially for the most vulnerable students that will endure long after the pandemic is gone, and we have not fully come to grips with it as a society.
Okay, let's move on for a second to your first 90 days in Congress. I think it's fair to say that. Look, I guess everyone's first 90 days in Congress are unique to them, but certainly your first 90 days in Congress have some special attributes and features. And Congressman Torres, why don't you share with us what it was like to be, what it's been like during the last 90 days in Congress?
90 days. I mean, I could write more about my first 9 days.
Right. Well, begin with the first 9 days. That's good.
It is,
what happened? What was going on down there?
Look, I grew up as a poor kid from the Bronx. So the experience of going from public housing to the House of Representatives is surreal and on its own under normal circumstances. But if you had said to me a year ago that I would become a member of Congress during an infectious disease outbreak, that I would witness a siege on the US Capitol during the Electoral College vote count, and that I would then vote to impeach a president who had been impeached once before, and all of that would happen within the first 2 weeks, I would have said that sounds like a movie. That sounds like fantasy. So I could write a memoir.
You can't make this stuff up.
No, it's the experience of the 117th Congress is qualitatively different from the norm. So it's been hectic, but I have found it. I'm grateful to be in Congress. I find it both fulfilling and frustrating at the same time. But as far as I'm concerned, a post-COVID world can't come soon enough.
Thank you, Congressman Garbarino.
Yeah, I can't agree with Richie, but this is we're going to share this the first 2 weeks. All the new members of the 117th will share this for forever. We can we'll be writing books. I got the first chapters already done in the first 2 weeks. But it has been, and I think being frustrated is definitely a good point. I came from the New York State Assembly where there were 43 Republicans out of 150 members total. So there were more than two Democrats, every one Republican. I figured with such a close divide in the House, in the House of Representatives, I think it was at the start it was 222 to 213. I figured there'd be a little more bipartisanship, and unfortunately, I still feel like I'm in the State Assembly. I think a lot has happened over the last couple months where there just really hasn't been, and this is not from the rank and file members, and I think Rich, you would agree, but I think the leadership, there hasn't been a appetite for bipartisanship, but I think the rank and file, and I could speak to it because I've had Democratic members ask me to co-sponsor bills with them, work on stuff. But as of right now, I feel like I'm still in the state assembly because it doesn't sound like nobody wants to hear my opinion right now. And I think that will change, just the way the rank and file members have been. You know, the younger members, the lower level members. Everybody wants, I think, to work towards getting something accomplished.
Well, it's interesting, Congressman Garbarino. You went from Albany to Washington, and it looks like Albany is starting to rival Washington in terms of sizzle. There's so much going on up there, which I guess we could save for another call. But of course, Washington is our nation's capital, and I think you both hit on a very important point, which is that the last 90 days have demonstrated that our leaders in Washington do have some difficulty collaborating. I think there's no question about that. So we're living in very partisan times. But I want to ask you: Are you gentlemen optimistic that there will be opportunities to collaborate on both sides of the aisle? Congressman Garbarino.
Absolutely. I think, and like I said, I've already seen it. You know, I'm a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which focuses on bipartisan issues. Richie's the vice chair of Homeland, and I'm on that committee. Homeland Security is probably going to be, if not one of the most bipartisan committees, I think, just because there's so many issues that it's not a Republican or Democratic issue. It's something that everybody can get on board with. So I do think that we will at some point move towards, working together. Right now, and it's all leadership. I mean, I was the one of a few Republicans that voted for a certain bill, and my own party kind of threw me under the bus for it. But so it's leadership on both sides that I think need to somehow sit down and work together. The rank and file members are there. I think, I've had a lot of conversations with Democrats and Republicans that we're all looking just forward to getting something done. It doesn't have to be, we got to move ahead for the country.
Yes, agreed. Congressman Torres.
Well, for me, American politics has entered the realm of the absurd. I never quite understood. I never take politics too personally. Like if you and I have differences of opinion about the proper role of government or the optimal rate of taxation in society, I'm not clear why it has to necessarily follow that we have to be bitter enemies. In a pluralistic society, there should be differences of opinion, right? All of us are fallible. We want to expose ourselves to a diversity of opinion. That's a strength, not a weakness. For me, the issue is not disagreement. The issue is demonization. Is when you make it personal, when you resort to the politics of personal destruction. I feel like the extremes on both sides are examples of what I call religiosity without religion. It's the channeling of a religious impulse into politics. There are those on the extremes who'd say that I alone have the absolute truth. My policy prescriptions are the only path to salvation. And those who disagree with me are not merely wrong, but are evil, and not merely my adversaries, but are my enemies and should be burned at the stake for heresy. And as far as I'm concerned, that kind of fundamentalism is fundamentally incompatible with governing, with politics, which should be about compromise and cooperation and coalition building, right? So that's my view, is we have to end the politics of personal destruction. And we have to recognize that not every issue should be grounds for all-out partisan warfare. Fiorello LaGuardia famously said, there's no Republican or Democratic way to take out the trash. There's no Republican or Democratic way to address cybersecurity.
Sure.
Ranking member of the Cybersecurity Committee, that's an issue that is so technical and so essential that it should lend itself to bipartisan compromise and cooperation. I knew from the beginning that I was going to secure membership on financial services, but I was debating what my second committee should be. And if you're looking for partisan warfare, then you should join judiciary or oversight. But if you're looking to actually work across the aisle, you join Homeland Security, or you join Armed Services, or you join Foreign Affairs. Those committees tend to be, in my opinion, much more conducive to bipartisan cooperation.
And Congressman Torres, if I could just ask you a follow-up and also ask Congressman Garbarino to pitch in on this. You said something very interesting, and I think it probably resonates with everyone that's listening in on the call, and that is that we need to work together, right? We need to compromise. And I guess on some level, that's the essence of democracy, is that parties with different interests come together and try to find the basis for the common good. But there are also those among us who would say, well, wait a second, there are some really important issues out there. They're so important that we can't afford to compromise. We must get to end of job on this, and compromise will not work. And I think you see that on both sides of the aisle. So how do you, and I think you're both saying similar things here, how do you reconcile that? How do you know when an issue is one where it's okay to compromise as opposed to one where you really have to fight to the bitter end on it? How do you know?
I mean, it's a hard question to answer in the abstract because it depends on the issue and it depends on, everyone has their non-negotiables. But, my view is, a popular term in the Democratic Party is progressive. And I feel like there are too many progressives who let progressive purity be the enemy of progress. Like, as far as I'm concerned, some progress is better than none at all. I would rather actually get something done than tweet about utopia. That to me is what governing is about.
Very good. Fair answer.
I agree about, learning from my law practice, you can't always get, when you go inside and negotiate, you're not going to get 100%, but 50% sometimes is better than nothing. It's, usually when you come out of a negotiation and both sides are not happy, that means there's a good deal.
Yes.
They had to give up on something. So there has to be, I think, and and Richie made a very good point about right now with the extremes, the hatred of the other side. It didn't always used to be that way. I mean, he could tell you stories from probably the city council, and I could tell you stories from Albany of just, we'd have disagreements on the floor over policy, but then we'd all go out afterwards. I met Richie's chief at a karaoke bar when he was working with an assemblyman. We were good buddies, and it's, sort of going away from that because of, I think, just some of the thoughts of people. But COVID hasn't helped either. Before we got on, Richie and I were talking about how we haven't even met members of our own conference. It's been 3 months in Washington, and so not getting to meet your own members and not getting to meet the members of
Sure.
the aisle, that's going to stop.
Well, let me ask you, Congressman, both. Do you think this rigidity, does it bubble up from the bottom, or does it roll down from the top?
Can I?
Please.
I think it's two causes, maybe more than one. I mean, one is, this is off the record.
Of course.
I think it touches on what Andrew said. I think leadership has an incentive to maintain the tribalism because it gives them more power. I believe. I mean, I don't know how you felt, Andrew, but during orientation, I just thought it was strangely segregated by party. And I'm convinced that the incentives favor tribalism and that leadership has a vested interest in maintaining tribalism in order to consolidate their grip on power. Because if Republicans and Democrats at the rank and file level began collaborating, you could cause a whole lot of trouble in DC.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, 100%. And yeah, and you're right. New member orientation, the first week we were together, then the second week we were separated. It was, and the first week together was, they're, COVID, but there was definitely, it wasn't conducive to us all being freshman members and together and going through this experience together, which should have brought us all much closer, and it didn't. And but I think, Bob, I think it's both the true believers that are coming in now as well as leadership. I think it's coming from both angles. I think there's an incentive definitely for leadership, but I also think there's some true believers that don't believe in compromise. And I've got a few on my side, and Richie's got a few on his side, and we just have to work. If they don't want to work with us, we just got to work without them, I guess.
Yes,
One of the causes here is Twitter. I mean, Twitter has had a radicalizing effect on our politics. And I've said, you can either be a celebrity or a congressperson, but you cannot be both.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Congressman, because So some people would also say, they'd agree with what you just said, but they'd also say that social media platforms like Twitter help to democratize the process, right? It helps leaders or whomever go directly to the public.
It creates the illusion of democracy. The social media is a distortion of reality. It is unrepresented. Most Americans, whether Democrats or Republicans, are practical, not ideological, are moderate, not radical. Right? There's an exhausted majority that's unrepresented on social media. If social media is essentially an alternate reality.
So are you a believer in the silent majority theory?
I am. I mean, it's been referred to as the exhaust. I'm not suggesting there are profound ideological differences within the silent majority, but most people are much more practical than the radicalism you see on Twitter.
So what you're saying is most people care about getting things done.
Most people care about putting food on the table.
Yeah.
And providing their children a quality education. Most people, and actually Andrew might be shocked here, most people don't want to defund the police. So most people do not want to abolish this institution or that institution. Just people want a fighting chance at a decent life for themselves and their family.
People don't care how many Twitter followers that I have. That's not their top priority. Their top priority is, whether I'm making their lives better. You talk to people and you talk to somebody, you go sit at a bar and you talk to somebody, just a random stranger at the bar, and you talk to them. They're not sitting there talking to me about these huge national issues or what's going on Facebook or Twitter. I don't even read my own Facebook or Twitter, so I don't have access to it. They talk about, what they did today, what things could do better. They got a flat tire because they hit a pothole. I mean, that's the real world stuff that most people care about. It's not, it's not this stuff on Twitter or Facebook or, where just, it just people make everything out to be the biggest deal. People care about putting, like Richie said, putting food on the table, getting to work, making sure their kids, can go to school. That it's the day-to-day issues. That's what they care about.
So gentlemen, I've got a couple of questions here from the audience. Question number one, which big issues or areas of potential reform are most likely to gain bipartisan support?
I think,
Actually,
I'm sorry, Congressman Garbarino.
I was going to say, I think infrastructure, if done properly, and I think, and I'm on the infrastructure focus group in Problem Solvers, there is a lot of issues that I think could get 350 members of Congress to get behind, you want to know if the question is can we get a bill that gets all the low-hanging fruit done, which could have 75, 80 senators and 350 members of Congress, or are we going to put? But I think infrastructure is, Richie needs his district needs it as much as mine does, and it's something I think we can focus on and be like, all right, this is how we can grow our districts. This is how we can help the people. So I think that could be, if done properly, we can really have a lot of bipartisanship on that.
Congressman Torres.
it seems to me cybersecurity is an area of cooperation, and then within infrastructure, it seems to me both Democrats and Republicans, both rural America and urban America, has a vested interest in closing the digital divide.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So I have another question for you from the audience. To what extent are differences in policy priorities and voting a function of differences in who supports your respective campaigns? In other words, the support bases of the two parties are different, with different legislative interests. And to what extent does that determine votes? If that's clear. Let's take the first part of that question. To what extent are differences in policy priorities and voting a function of differences in who supports your respective campaigns? Congressman Torres, why don't you take a shot?
I feel like if you're an independent elected official, like myself and like Andrew, then you're voting based on your own values and based on the interest of your constituents. But if you see yourself as part of a larger movement of progressive revolution, a conservative revolution, then you're unlikely, in my opinion, you're not representing your constituents, you're representing a progressive or conservative industrial complex. I value my independence. I do not want to be responsive to interest outside my district. I want to represent what's best for my district. And that's why I value my integrity and independence as a public servant. And I'm willing to even disagree with my own party every so often. I'm more supportive of charter schools than my party, because my district has the highest concentration of charter schools, and I've seen the transformative impact it has in improving life outcomes for my constituents. And I'm going to defend to death the right of my parents to send their children to the best possible school. Much more pro-Israel than some of my colleagues in the Democratic Party. So I'm going to do what I believe is right. I'm a proud Democrat, always have been, and always will be. But my integrity is most important.
Yeah, and it brings me back to my leader in Albany, the minority leader. He always said, vote your district. He goes, you know what, you have to vote your district, and that's what I do. And that's, and I'm a New York Republican. I'm a Long Island Republican. That's a lot different than a Texas Republican or Montana Republican or just anybody. Would I win Louis Gohmert's district in Texas? Probably not, but he definitely wouldn't win my district here in Long Island either. You just can't, and Rich is right, your beliefs. I mean, when you support something and you believe in it, you should be able to vote for it. And just like if you don't believe in something, you shouldn't support it. If you don't think it's the best thing for your constituents, and that a lot of members don't. And I think the fact that we both come from legislative backgrounds, we've been through this. A lot of members have. I feel terrible for the members who didn't come from it, because they have no clue what's going on. They're reliant on their staff. So you hope they have a good staff. They don't understand that, you don't have to follow the party line all the time. You can be independent. You can do what you want. I mean, that, it's as long as you're true to yourself. Yeah, I have to be able to sleep at night.
Yes.
The amount of political pressure I got to object to the election in January. I mean, I got so much political pressure. And I remember the morning of January 6th, finally saying to my staff, I said, F it. If they want to primary me, let them primary me. I thought certification was the right vote. So that's what I did. But, there was a lot of pressure to go the other way.
But I guess there's a reason why they call those people in the House whips, right? They're there to whip you into conforming with the party. Is that not true? And if you resist being whipped, there will be consequences to pay. Is that not true? Congressman Torres.
I mean, there could be, but I feel like I feel like members of Congress can have greater freedom to be independent than they realize.
Okay.
I think it has less to do with concrete consequences and more to do with the psychology of tribalism and peer pressure and irrational shit. But I'm going to do what I think is right. I don't care to be beloved. I prefer to be effective.
Yeah, I mean, I've exactly being effective. I've been a Republican who has voted against some of the whip's recommendations already this year, and we haven't had many votes, but I have, I think, 2 or 3 I've gone against what they've recommended, or what the stance was. But there was more of a carrot than a stick approach. They didn't say, if you don't go with us, there's going to be punishment. They came in the whip team, and this is whether it was Steve Scalise, who's been phenomenal. He's the whip, and he's calling me up and say, what are you thinking? Why? And he talks it out with me. And after he talks out with me, he realizes, all right, you know what? It's better for your district to go this way. I get it. And that's it. There's no, at least there's been no punishment yet for going against it. It's good to have them there to help with leadership and to talk it out, to be a sounding board. And that's what it's been so far for me.
Excellent. Thank you. We have another question from our audience. We have a member who lives down in Georgia who wants to know the following. Do you think the pushback on the change in voting in Georgia will have long-term effects across the country? Congressman Garbarino.
No, I don't think so. I think this is just the, I mean, I don't, you think about what we've done, what we did a month ago. I don't think, I look at what New York rules are for voting, and I've always voted for expansion of voting. New York State, you need an excuse to get an absentee ballot. You need to fill out. You need an ID number or a social security number to get an absentee ballot. I don't think Georgia's going to be as big as an issue as people play, because I think something's going to happen in 3 weeks that's going to have us talking about something else. So I don't, again, I could always be wrong, but I don't think it will have a long-term effect.
Congressman Torres.
Just see it as a continuation of the partisan warfare between Republicans and Democrats. I oppose all laws that restrict voting access, but there was an interesting article in the New York Times by Nate Cohen, who said that there's no evidence actually that voter access laws actually have any impact on voter turnout and electoral outcomes. And my gut feeling is that that's probably the case, that a voter who's determined to vote is going to do so, and a voter who's not determined to vote will fail to do so. The one thing that is a real concern is the length of lines. That's a real barrier to voting. No one should have to wait more than 30 minutes to cast it, and that's something that we should take seriously.
Sure. So my takeaway from your respective comments is that this might be much ado about nothing. My words, but that's my takeaway from this. And if I may add this, as someone who watches this from afar, I read it in the paper, I watch it on television. When I first heard it, I thought to myself, wow, this sounds terrible what they're doing. And then once a little context was provided and I started to hear about what they were doing in other states around the country, it dawned on me that there's really a potpourri of rules and regulations and with respect to voting and voting access. And it's very hard to make comparisons between the different states. But clearly there are differences between the different states in terms to how they approach voter access.
Voter access, I mean, look, and Richie said it before, he could win he had 160,000 people in his district and he was able to win a primary because there's only 6,000. We need to get the interest in people to vote. I mean, we have town elections in off years out here on Long Island. And listen, I think being a congressman is great, but I don't have the effect on people's day-to-day lives that the local town council or supervisor does when they control zoning and roads and all this. I mean, whether the supermarket or the condos or the apartments are going to go in down the block, or whether the parks open or clean. But these elections have some of the smallest turnouts in all year. The issue is, not, how do we get more people to go vote? It's not about, I think the access is there. It's easy to register. And New York New York used to be terrible, but the last 2 years they have made some effort in opening up registration and making it easier to register. But it's about getting people to the ballot box. And, again, they don't have to force them, but, I think the more people that show up, the better. So I think that should be the focus.
Yeah, I would describe it as much ado about nothing, because there is concern that the state legislature is doing the bidding of former President Trump, who waged a delegitimation campaign against the 2020 election. And the provision that concerns me is the state legislature in Georgia effectively took control of the Board of Elections, and it's within their legal right, but I feel like that could have the effect of politicizing the administration of elections, and there's concern about how that power is going to be put to use, and that's a legitimate concern. Dismiss that as much ado about nothing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Let's move on a second. Congressman Torres, I know that you serve on the House Financial Services Committee. Let's talk about some of your priorities on the committee. And I know we've talked about this before. Your views on, let's say, what happened recently with Robinhood, the broker dealer Robinhood, and the charges that maybe certain customers were denied access to the public markets. Do you have any views on that? But let's begin first with your general priorities on that committee, on the House Financial Services Committee.
So I have no shortage of priorities, but one of them is to integrate more people into the financial system. For me, it's a scandal that as we become more technologically advanced, there's been a real failure to harness the power of technology to integrate those who's historically been left behind into the financial system. In the Bronx, 30% of the residents are underbanked and 20% are unbanked, which to me is a scandal in a world of fintech. So figuring out how to creatively integrate people into the financial system. And when you have no access to mainstream financial services, you do fall prey to far more predatory financial products. So that's my concern. On the subject of Robinhood, I have a nuanced view. I once heard, it's going to be odd that I'm quoting a conservative economist, but I actually think this is a shrewd observation. I once heard Thomas Sowell said that in politics there are solutions, in economics there are trade-offs. And I view it as a trade-off. On one hand, it is true that Robinhood has had the effect of democratizing the stock market. My understanding is, according to Professor Gina Fletcher from the Duke University Law School, the racial wealth gap in retail trading has been cut in half.
Say that again, please.
The racial wealth gap in retail trading has been cut in half. And so that's a real public benefit. That is a real sign of improved market access. At the same time, I feel like there are legitimate questions about payment for order flow. My concern is that payment for order flow creates a perverse incentive for a broker to route orders not to the market maker who's going to offer the best price to the retail customer, but rather to the market maker who's going to offer them the highest payment. So a case could be made that there's something of a conflict of interest. And that concern is not purely theoretical. It's been borne out in practice. The SEC found that Robinhood failed to offer the best execution, costing their customers $34 million. So I see it as a trade-off. On one hand, it has expanded market access. On the other hand, payment for order flow does have perverse incentives.
Congressman Garbarino?
I mean, I haven't sat on all the hearings like Congressman Torres has. But you look at people say, well, what they did was specifically recently was market manipulation, stock prices, and they were stopping they're restricting the trading, and but you look at yourself. This is going to be something for CFPB and SEC. They're going to have to get to the bottom of this. Even the Financial Services Committee through their investigation. Were they doing this? Did they help people by doing this? Did they stop people? Because people were jumping in to buy it as much as they could. Did they stop people from losing their family fortunes because they thought they were going to get? There's a lot. There's a lot to get to delve into. There's a lot to find out.
Sure. Sure. And
I don't know. I don't know the answer.
I think that,
and Congressman Torres, if I can just go back to you for a second, I think I heard you say about payment for order flow that in the case of Robinhood, it was found or alleged that they had directed the order flow to market makers that where it was more advantageous to Robinhood as opposed to the customers. In the brokerage industry, we have rules and regulations. In fact, some people would say that brokerage is probably one of the most heavily regulated sectors in the economy. But we have a rule or a regulation referred to as best execution. And at the end of the day, every brokerage firm that buys and sells securities on behalf of customers must justify that they went out and sought best execution. And more often than not, and particularly with respect to retail customers, best price is what determines whether or not you achieve best execution. In the institutional world, it's not always that clear, but for the purposes of this conversation, we're talking about retail customers. So at the end of the day, those brokerage firms are audited, and they have to put the findings of their audit up on their websites. Rule 605, 606. And it's a way for you, for a customer, or for your competitors to see how well you did in terms of achieving best execution. And I guess it's fair to say that although brokers are strongly encouraged, in fact, mandated to do this, they don't always achieve that as an outcome, in which case they might be penalized. So it sounds to me like Robinhood was penalized for not fulfilling its responsibility. But as a general rule, brokers seek best execution. They're required to seek best execution. So I just wanted to put that out there and see if you had any reaction to that.
I agree with that, and I don't claim to have all the answers. I feel like we should tread carefully, especially when dealing with something as complicated as the plumbing of the stock market and the financial system. We have to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Okay.
Order flow might have its challenges, but it also enables zero commissions trading. And one of the advantages of Robinhood is the ability to purchase fractional shares, which puts it within reach of people who have far fewer means. So as with everything in life, it is a trade-off.
Well said. Well said. Why don't we move on here in our remaining time, and let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity. And Congressman Garbarino, I know that you are the ranking member of the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Protection and Innovation Subcommittee. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you do on that committee? And I guess our audience might be especially interested in your views on threats to the financial services industry and what steps are being taken to mitigate those threats. Congressman Garbarino.
Well, yeah, listen, I spent 8 years in Albany, and I did a lot of different things, focused on a lot of different things. And when I got into Congress, being the ranker on cybersecurity was definitely not it was definitely not one of the things I expected. But Congressman Katko, who's the ranking member of the Homeland Committee, he says, "I got something special for you." I said, "Okay," because he knew I wanted to be on financial services, and I didn't get on because there weren't enough spots. But he says, he's like, "I'm gonna put you in charge of this committee." And he's like, "You're going to deal with all the people that you would have dealt with on financial services." But I'm like, "I don't know anything about cybersecurity." He's like, "Don't worry, you'll be fine." And it's been, I'll tell you, learning the acronyms has been tough enough, but it is amazing. I'm so happy he gave me the opportunity because I have learned so much over the last few months sitting with different groups. Whether it's the CISA, which is the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, which is a new agency, which is tasked with doing a lot of different things, one of them being threat hunting. We just had the SolarWinds attack last year, and Microsoft, which the Microsoft breach 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, that both affected the government as well as private sector. SolarWinds was a lot tougher to find out because of what happened with, they were very particular in what they went after. Well, at Microsoft, they just went after everything. So it's really amazing learning all the different issues. We've had several different hearings, but specifically financial services, the threats, there's several, there's the ransomware attacks, and the attacks are different for different industries. If you have the healthcare or defense contractors, defense contractors have to spend their time keeping secrets safe. How we build the nuclear submarines, how we build these jets, how they keep those safe. So they have to protect against those threats. Financial services, they have they're fighting against several different threats. One, they got to protect all of their consumers' information, and protect against hacks like that. They also have to, protect against, how much, if a ransomware comes in and shuts down their business for the day. What happens if you're a credit card company, you can't log on, if people can't log on to your website to pay their bill? That's a huge, until you pay a ransom. That's a huge thing, and what might address that is, there's sharing information between CISA and the private sector. That should help. There's been talks, and I don't know if Richie can talk about this in financial services, whether there's been talk there, but whether you start regulating and following Bitcoin and all this cryptocurrency, because if people can't get paid for ransomware through cryptocurrency or through Bitcoin, are they still going to do it? So if it's traceable, that's going to be interesting. But another thing that financial services companies have to worry about are, what the government's going to do. There's discussions about notification law, and there's two parts of that. Right now you have 50 different states running 50 different notification aspects or notification rules, for its residents of that state if there's a breach. Now also we're going to require possibly when and how and within how much time does a financial industry business have to report to the government that there's been a breach. Because then if there's been a breach there, has there been a breach in other companies?
Yes.
There's going to be a lot that we have to work on, and I think legislatively, both through E&C, Financial Services, and the Homeland Security Committee, we have to work out this legislation, because I think there's got to be notification, but we need to know some information so we can protect everybody. But we also need to make sure it's you want to make it easier on the businesses, so they don't have to follow 50 different rules with 50 different states, plus 9 different rules with 9 different federal agencies. It's it's a lot. It's very costly to the businesses, and it might not be timely for the government. So it's stuff that
Yes.
we're going to work out.
Thank you. Congressman Torres, any thoughts on this?
Oh, I have no.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
The financial services has been the gold standard of cybersecurity. I know JP Morgan, for example, invests somewhere between $500 million to $1 billion a year in cybersecurity. We have to invest more in our cyber defenses. The United States for a long time has had a strategy of what is it? Defense forward or forward defense.
Yes.
The assumption of the cyber strategy is that the best defense is offense.
Yes.
And that has been shown to be false by the SolarWinds breach of the federal government. So there's no substitute for investing in our cyber defense. And I would argue the Achilles heel of the American Jobs Plan, as far as I can tell, is a lack of investment in cyber infrastructure. We ought to be either updating Einstein or creating a whole new system. My understanding is that Einstein is capable of detecting and preventing intrusions based on a known database of threats, of known threats. We need a system capable of detecting and preventing anomalous intrusions into the federal network.
Interesting.
And supply chain issues too. That's another
Yes.
thing. Supply chain issues is a big problem.
So, gentlemen, in our remaining minutes, we've only got a handful. I've got a question in from the audience here. Let me put this to both of you. Congressman Jordan and Getz requested a hearing with the House Judiciary Committee for the elderly and adults trapped in unjust and unconstitutional guardianship conservatorships. Do you know what the status is of this proposed hearing?
That would be up to that would be up to the chairperson of the committee. I don't serve on that. I don't
Okay.
serves on that committee.
Okay, fair enough. Congressman Torres, any?
Yeah. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
good enough. Thank you. Let's talk for a second about President Biden, and with his recent rollout of his infrastructure plan. SALT cap discussions have reemerged in the headlines. What are your respective views on restoring the SALT deduction? Congressman Garbarino.
The 10,000 cap really hurt my district. It hurt all of New York. We saw a lot of people leaving the state. Most people in my district have their property taxes are more than $10,000 a year. So getting that back would be very helpful to people in my district, a lot of property owners, a lot of business owners. So I'm supportive of bringing that back. I think we do need to. It would be very good for people in my district.
Congressman Torres.
I favor the restoration of SALT deductibility. I thought the repeal of SALT was politicized, was an attempt to inflict suffering on blue states, and we should reverse it because our property owners certainly need relief. The burden of public services falls heavily on their shoulders.
Okay, thank you. Let's, in our remaining minutes here, let's talk a little bit about small businesses. So what steps is Congress taking to ensure small businesses have the funding and resources to survive the pandemic? Representative Torres, any thoughts on that?
Well, we've had several programs like the PPP, the State Small Business Credit Initiative. There was a $25 billion fund for our restaurants. But this might actually be a surprise coming from me. I actually feel like the best contribution we can make to our small businesses is to keep them open. I have a moderate view on this subject. I feel like we should be careful not to shut down businesses unless there's a real risk, an imminent risk, that the healthcare system is on the verge of collapse, that the sheer number of cases is going to overwhelm the healthcare system. That has not been true since March of early 2020. So I feel like, we should not act as if everyone has to, be in a state of lockdown. Like if you've been infected or if you've been vaccinated, you carry no risk of spreading the virus, and you should be able to go to a movie theater. You should be able to go to a stadium. You should be able to go to a restaurant. I actually support vaccine passports. I know it's controversial, but it allows us to pursue a middle ground rather than this all or nothing approach of shutting down businesses like we're turning on a switch. That's destabilizing and disruptive, and no amount of government funding is going to compensate for the economic devastation that comes with it.
Yes. Congressman Garbarino, your thoughts?
I agree with Richie about the shutdown. I was supportive of the shutdown back in March and April. He was on the same calls I was every day with the governor's office, and we did think our healthcare system was about to be overrun. Our hospitals were going from having 2 cases to 2 floors of cases in 2 days. So it was bad. But I think now we are now seeing a little more, especially in the state, that the choices and decisions are a little more arbitrary and not based on science or. So I think you need to work in personal choice as well. If we open up restaurants till midnight, we're not forcing people to go to restaurants till midnight. They can go if they want, if they feel safe, and they can go. We gave these businesses rules that said, look, you can open safely if you do these things. They're doing these things, but we're still restricting them as the times they can be open. It should be one or the other. But I think we need to get focused more on reopening them. Because that's the best thing that we can do for these businesses. We can't just keep giving them money. They need to be able to grow and reopen.
Yes, well said. And gentlemen, on that note, I see that our time is about up, and I really want to thank you for a very interesting and thought-provoking session. We wish you both the very best in the Congress. I have to say that I'm heartened to see 2 young and energetic and constructive professionals representing us in Washington. And again, we wish you all the very best in your endeavors on behalf of the people. We look forward to seeing you again. So let's not be strangers. We really want to have you back. And I also want to thank the audience for tuning in. And to remind everyone that they should check our website for information about the upcoming events on April 27th, the 27th, and the 29th, respectively. We have Mike Novogratz, the folks from Real Blocks, and of course, you don't want to miss. And I would invite you, Congressman, to our virtual cocktail party, okay, on the 29th. You don't want to miss it. It's a hot event, guys. So listen, on that note, what's that?
I said, I love cocktails.
Well, I'll tell you, it's great because you get to go from room to room. You don't have to drive. You're nice and comfortable. And by the way, if you don't like what someone says, you can just shut it down. So it's all good. And so are you. So again, thank you both for joining us, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. And we'll see you later this month with Novogratz and the folks from Real Blocks. So gentlemen, thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.